The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
Okay, let's go.
We gonna stay in solidarity together. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what your national identity are. I don't care what region you are. You a human being. We got a deep Jewish brother named Bernie Sanders who's bringing us together.
There is real concern right now that Bernie Sanders is so far ahead in the lead.
Democrats need to sober up and figure out what the hell they're going to do about that.
The corporate media is there to further the agenda of the establishment.
Ran by billionaires and hosted by millionaires.
Bernie Sanders makes my skin crawl.
The abuse that we have all been subjected to by Bernie Bros.
You see, there's a powerful club here in this town, and you're not in it.
I don't really trust any of them because what they want is ratings.
The DNC came against Bernie.
What many in the Democratic Party establishment fear is not that Bernie couldn't beat Trump. It's that Bernie would beat Trump, transform the Democratic Party, and transform the country.
That is the establishment's nightmare.
All right, so I told you having a podcast studio inside your house is dangerous because it's 1 o'clock in the morning right now, and I can't sleep. And this is, I don't know if this is good or bad, but I can't sleep because I'm dying to do this episode. And I told myself I was going to wait, but I can't. So this is Deep Shallow Dive, exclusive episode on Bernie Sanders' 2020 election and what is known as the Bernie's Blackout. Okay, so seriously, I have been wanting to do this episode almost as much as I wanted to do the Sound of Freedom episode. And, you know, this probably was another main reason why I started this podcast. I actually did an Instagram/Facebook story on this about a year ago, and it's a fascinating topic, and it's one that, again, kind of like Sound of Freedom, I feel like the story needs to be told, and you can decide for yourself how to interpret that story. But fundamentally, what I want to do today is take you back to 2020, and really it's going to be, February, March, April of 2020, a very short, concentrated period of time. And if you remember that timing, my friends, that was the beginning of COVID-19 and, quite frankly, the beginning of change to this world. And so what we're going to do today is using the Vice TV documentary that's called Bernie's Blackout as really the basis for this. And then I've pulled clips and footage from a bunch of other places. But fundamentally, those guys did an amazing documentary that talked all about how the corporate media, the mainstream media, and I'm talking about MSNBC, CNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS. Again, this is not Fox News or anything that would be considered on the right. This is the mainstream media that really is all considered on the left. And we're going to take a deep dive into the Bernie Sanders situation from 2020. And I am very curious if at the end of this, if what happened to him sounds familiar. I'm going to kind of tease that, and let's play this out a little bit. But let's start off with this. So this is January, February 2020, and this is when the Sanders campaign is gearing up and starting to get their motor running. Get their motor running, and literally head out on the highway.
Do you want a better America?
Are you all ready for a political revolution?
People are standing up for justice. That is what this campaign is about.
Democracy has been stolen from us.
The entire establishment came against Bernie.
The mainstream media isn't owned by the people. It's owned by rich people.
Even as Sanders did better and better in the polls, there's always sort of a new counter narrative that was meant to sort of take him down.
We're always told that CNN and MSNBC are the anti-Trump channels. They're also the anti-Bernie channels.
One thing that we learned in this campaign is how powerful mainstream media still really is.
All right, so let me highlight a few things from that, which I found very interesting, and I drew parallels to another political figure and their campaign. I'm not going to say. This is 1 o'clock in the morning, people. I'm a little punchy. All right, I'm not going to say, but let's see if we can figure it out together. I've already figured it out. Let's see if you can figure it out. Okay, so here was some themes from that segment. Better America. Are you ready for the revolution? Democracy has been stolen. And then every time he does something, there's a new counter narrative to take him down. So that was AOC in one of the clips. And then obviously you had Bernie in a couple. And overall, again, those were segments from various news entities that I pulled. So again, this is roughly February, maybe early March of 2020. And then, by the way, and again, God, we all have short-term memory. I know I do. I'm going to actually do another, I guess it almost would be like a prequel to this, but the 2016 election between Bernie and Hillary, that was also another very, very interesting runoff for the Democratic candidacy, which obviously went to Hillary. But yeah, there's going to be a prequel that goes into that. But this one, again, this focuses, the main election is the 2020 election, and the documentary is the Vice TV documentary. It's called Bernie Blackout. I'm going to put a link in the show notes or in the description so you'll be able to find it. And okay, now let's give a listen to, this is Nina Turner. So now we're getting into like March of 2020. So basically, 15, 20 days after those previous clips. And this is Nina Turner. She was Bernie Sanders' campaign manager, and she is going on a talk show to just talk about kind of what's going on to them during their campaign.
The media doesn't understand it, either ignores it or dismisses it, caricatures it. Latest example, PBS, of all people, did a lengthy piece, 13 minutes long plus, on 2020 in general and did not mention Senator Sanders.
Not one time.
One time.
I'm still waiting on the apology.
How does that happen?
It just, and thank you both. I mean, I want to thank Rise and thank Hill for just being fair arbiters and just laying out the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The Bernie blackout is real. It's not a figment of our imagination. It almost seems like every morning these networks get a script that says blackout Bernie Sanders, even though he is polling very high. He's either number one or number two. He's been durable. He has he's gone up in the polls as of late. His fundraising prowess, all of because he would say ours, but they continue to neglect to talk about his strength. Part of that is this class dynamic. And Crystal, you talk about it all the time, that these networks are wired only to care about the upper middle class and the ultra wealthy, and they leave out the narratives of the working poor in this country. It's caste and it's class. And because the senator is connecting with both of those, see, they can't tell the same lies they told in 2016. So since we can't just make that part up, we'll just not talk about him altogether. It is wrong. And I would say that about any candidate. I don't want to see any candidate blacked out.
All right, I'm about to do some serious work here. So I can't believe she said what she said, and it literally made me think of something that I've just got to dig and find and add to this. But she talked about how every morning it's almost like they get a script. Listen to it again.
It almost seems like every morning these networks get a script that says blackout Bernie Sanders.
All right, so if you're friends with me on Facebook or Instagram, you may have seen me post this again, I think like 6 months ago or so. but give this a listen. This was a clip that I created from mashing together a bunch of other clips, but take a listen. This was not about Bernie Sanders, but this was in regards to another candidate. This is awesome.
Controlling exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Okay, seriously. If you are not entertained at this point, I don't know what to tell you. But that was a clip that circulated again. It was like the same message and the same, this is extremely dangerous to our democracy, was airing across local morning, afternoon news stations across America on CBS, NBC, ABC, and Fox, actually. So, like, it was on all four, believe it or not, which makes sense if you think about I'm sorry, this is fun for me. The aforementioned other candidate and all the issues there. So that was a cohesive message being delivered by those networks. And then think back to what Nina Turner, Bernie Sanders' campaign manager, said in regards to the Bernie blackout. Okay, so at this point, Bernie's in the lead, and we are into March of 2020, the beginning of March of 2020. Seriously, the timeline on all this stuff was really fast. I think it happened within a 2-week or 3-week period. But this is when the wheels on the bus did not go round and round. They started coming off.
NBC News projects Bernie Sanders, the winner in Nevada. Brand new breaking news numbers.
And the absolute disgust of the mainstream media.
No other candidate has anything like this sort of digital brown shirt brigade.
Bernie Sanders makes my skin crawl.
Can you explain why you're still in the race?
He saw nowhere near that level of support.
Don't get your hopes up on Bernie yet.
Bernie, you're full of it.
Don't come here and dream of your violent overthrow of America.
The abuse that we have all been subjected to by Bernie Bros.
Bernie Bros, right?
The corporate media is there to further the agenda of the establishment.
Ran by billionaires and hosted by millionaires.
There is real concern right now that Bernie Sanders is so far ahead in the lead.
Democrats need to sober up and figure out what the hell they're going to do about that.
What happens when corporate media unites against one candidate?
Man, so much to unpack there. Okay, first of all, and I think the most important part of that was the CNN reporter who said, Bernie Sanders is so far in the lead. What are the Democrats going to do? That's interesting. I also thought, like, man, they're getting vitriol in their hate. Bernie Sanders makes my skin crawl, quote unquote. You're full of it, Bernie. That's from Chris Matthews on MSNBC. Or no, I'm sorry. Yeah, that is Chris Matthews. I thought that might have been Joe Scarborough, but that was Chris Matthews. And then the other thing that I found interesting was they start in on all of Bernie's fan base. You know, some call them the Bernie Bros. You know, I've got several friends who are big Bernie Sanders fans, and they call themselves burners, the Bernie's burners. But again, oh my God, I have to laugh every time this happens because it's such a playbook to me. So think about the parallels to another group of zealous supporters, or is it zealot? What is that word? Zealot or zealous? See, I told you in the last episode, sometimes you blank on words. Okay, it's zealot. So again, now they're attacking the Bernie Bros or the burners who are actually like super passionate. I always really respected my friends who were Bernie supporters because, man, they really love this guy and they really got behind him. So again, I can't help it. I laugh every time. There's a parallel to that other group. Okay, so the last part of that previous clip, it said, so what happens when corporate media unites against one candidate? And that's what's starting to happen. So now give a listen.
It's an example of a completely manufactured narrative. It's not to excuse, this or that terrible tweet or this or that, terrible social media posting. It's only to say that it's the rough and tumble of a campaign. And when you are exclusively trying to scandalize one campaign's situation and you're illustrating an actual attitude and bias that is not fair and is not objective.
The Bernie Bro narrative dominates coverage. Can Sanders' campaign overcome this latest attempt to derail his momentum?
I'm going to play for you the latest attempt because now the gloves are coming off and it's going to get bad. But this is pretty interesting. So see how this is developing. Again, we're talking about roughly 2.5 weeks now where Bernie is, decisively in the lead. Okay, now give a listen. I think this is our buddy Chris Matthews.
With Bernie leading in the polls, Chris Matthews encourages the other candidates to attack the frontrunner. The Stop Sanders movement is on full display.
This one feels, because of the Bloomberg factor, feels like a big moment that we can predict it's going to be a big moment. Good or bad, which way it'll go, we don't know. Does it feel like that to you?
Yeah, and I hope that the candidates who have been telegraphing their punches against Senator Sanders, are actually going to deliver them.
Can Americans trust that a democratic socialist president will not give authoritarians a free pass?
And that's why Russia is helping you get elected so you'll lose to him.
Wait, I'm sorry. What did you say?
And that's why Russia is helping you get elected so you'll lose to him.
Wait a minute. One more time.
And that's why Russia is helping you get elected so you'll lose to him.
Russia, Russia, Russia. When all else fails, just blame Russia. Honestly, I've been stringing this story together for a few months now, but man, I did not really realize it would come together this nicely. That's insane. One of my taglines. Pointed out by my buddy. Quick shout out to Dave Carlander, Coach Carlander as he is known, who said, hey, I love when you say that's insane, but sometimes I don't really know what you're talking about is insane. So maybe elaborate on that. So the elaboration is, what's insane to me is the parallels of what happened to Bernie Sanders in 2020. I'm sorry, with that other candidate. It is insane. Are you seeing it yet? I hope you are. All right, so at this point, we're on the heels of Super Tuesday, which if you don't know, that's basically the election day when the greatest number of U.S. states hold their primary elections. So it's like ridiculously important day for each side, basically. All right, give a listen.
It's 24 hours before Super Tuesday. The question remains, is there an anti-Bernie bias in the media and the Democratic Party?
It's just been sort of a whiplash period for all of us following the Biden campaign. There were a lot of folks on the Biden campaign who didn't think they'd even be around for Super Tuesday.
Out of the public eye, Pete and Amy fly to Dallas, Texas to meet up with Joe Biden for a scheduled rally just 24 hours before Super Tuesday. Beto joins Amy and Pete for a Biden rally.
All right, real quick. So, as you heard, someone from the Biden campaign said, we didn't even think we'd be here for Super Tuesday. And then the most interesting part is all of a sudden, Pete, Amy, and Beto, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Beto O'Rourke fly to Dallas to meet up with the Bidens. And here's what happens next.
Where they shock the world with their abrupt departure from the race to endorse Joe Biden.
Ladies and gentlemen, el próximo presidente de los Estados Unidos, Joe Biden! Let's do it for Joe!
I'm delighted to endorse and support Joe Biden for president.
Today, I am ending my campaign and endorsing Joe Biden for president.
All right, so basically, again, quick recap before we get to the next part, which is the best part. So Beto the dork, Pete, Amy, they all dropped out. They all throw their weight behind Biden. Everybody is Team Biden at this point. I mean, that's interesting. And then
the coronavirus pandemic has all but shut the 2020 Democratic primaries down.
I'm sorry, what?
The coronavirus pandemic has all but shut the 2020 Democratic primaries down.
I mean, okay, so now the primaries are shut down. The Democratic primaries are done. Those guys had dropped out. Everybody is Team Biden. And really, it's Biden against Bernie at this point.
With near constant media attention on the virus, there's one new election story the mainstream media refuses to tell. Independent journalist Katie Halper breaks the story on her weekly podcast. She interviews a former staffer for Biden in the early 90s. The victim alleges sexual assault.
And then he went down my skirt, but then up inside it.
I wanted someone who doesn't have such a record as a Sanders supporter to tell the story, because I thought I wanted to make sure people didn't think I was politicizing it, or, that this wasn't a totally honest story, which it is.
I looked up to him. He was like my father's age. He was this champion of women's rights. In my eyes, I have no platform. I am no one.
I believe her. I spoke to her brother and her friend, both of whom remember her telling about the incident at the time. But no one else will tell.
Tara Reade had a very hard time getting her story told, vetted, shared at all. You see, there's a powerful club here in this town, and you're not in it. And neither is Tara. I thought Tara deserved a full vetting and a fair hearing from a mainstream outlet. But as I reached out to mainstream folks that I know to see if they were interested in breaking this bombshell story, I heard back crickets. Nothing. No one seemed to want to touch it. And you can bet that if the shoe were on the other foot and you had a similarly credible accuser of Bernie Sanders, there's no doubt that she would have no trouble whatsoever getting tons of coverage. So it's an incredibly powerful example of the way that this ideological bias works to help the anointed candidate, Joe Biden, and you just see this glaring hypocrisy from people who would use the hashtag #BelieveWomen, who would use the hashtag #MeToo, and yet with Tara Reade.
Okay, that's a whole nother deep, shallow dive, but that literally was the end of the Me Too movement, if you remember. Seriously, think about it. Think about it. That was it. We didn't hear anything after that. And then as important as that, so at this point, COVID's here. There's no more primaries. There's no more debates. There's really no more any type of campaigning going on. And then this happened. So this is about a week later. Let's go to ABC News. David Muir. Dude's got nice hair. Doesn't seem to age. I'm not mad at him for either one of those.
209 days until the election. Bernie Sanders has now dropped out of the race. Joe Biden will be the Democratic nominee. And here's Mary Bruce.
Bernie Sanders dropped out today, telling supporters victory was, quote, virtually impossible.
I wish I could give you better news, but I think you know the truth.
Sanders' path to the nomination had become increasingly unrealistic ever since Joe Biden's big Super Tuesday comeback. And as the coronavirus crisis grew, so did the question.
This feels a little bit like it did when you didn't come out when Hillary Clinton was clearly the person folks were going for. So can you explain why you're still in the race and what this path is that you see?
One of the reasons, but that's not quite accurate, I worked as hard as I could for Hillary Clinton.
Today, Sanders gave in.
I cannot, in good conscience, continue to mount a campaign that cannot win and which would interfere with the important work required of all of us in this difficult hour.
All right, I'm going to play you one more clip from Crystal Ball. She was quoted a couple times, or actually there were a couple segments with her in this episode. And then I am going to wrap it up. Man, this was a good one.
There's one thing that we learned in this campaign. It is how powerful mainstream media still really is, how much sway their narrative setting has over the public discourse.
Jeff Winchell performed a final analysis of the amount of coverage MSNBC gave Bernie Sanders throughout the campaign. In the early portion where he was the frontrunner, the other candidates were mentioned distinctly more. There are only 2 moments when Bernie received more coverage than other candidates: after his Super Tuesday loss and the day after he suspended his campaign. It's a glaring example of how the mainstream media chose to emphasize his campaign's problems and to undermine his successes.
There were only 2 days that he got more mainstream media coverage than the other candidates. After his Super Tuesday loss, and then the day he suspended his campaign. All right, everybody. Wow, this ended up being my longest episode to date. Anyway, wow, that was awesome. I really enjoyed doing that. I can't believe I'm still up at this hour. It's almost 2:30, and this thing's going to go live in about an hour and a half. But you know what? I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you saw the parallels. I hope you followed the story. I hope I told it well. I think I did. I think I should get like I don't know, what should I get for this? A Nobel Peace Prize? An Oscar? An Emmy? A Pulitzer Prize? A Webby? A Streamy? What? All right, how about none of those? Anyway, remember, wow, let's call a spade with all this stuff, all right? Talk to you soon.
This episode was brought to you by Boost Liquid Vitamins. Wake up, take your Boost, start your day. Drink your vitamins, build your immune system with Boost. Available on Boost.com.